Well, basically, we are here today to talk about two things, and I'm really happy to hear that both of you two are working in education, because this is super relevant. It's basically a different type of approach to education. And then we're going to talk a bit about one of the examples that we use in some of our trainings. That's on land grabbing related to mining in El Salvador. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really going to do this very formally, but I think we do need to say that there is a travel warning to El Salvador by the State Department, surprise, surprise. And that UMD is not like in any way
sponsoring, affiliating, or encouraging your travel to El Salvador.
A good way of putting it. And I can talk at length about why we are still sending people to El Salvador and how it's safe. But yeah, we can take that afterwards. Is that something that you want to go into? Cool, let's go ahead. So basically, what I'm going to go through is talking a bit about the human rights-based approach, which is the way that we think about development, and which is the whole theory of change and background for why we do these types of trainings. And we're going to talk about like why we're doing the trainings, talk about El Salvador and the mining problems, and then talk a bit about what you get out of this. And let me just maybe explain like who we are. I'm Sophie. I'm Danish. I'm not South African or Australian or something else from my accent. I've worked with ActionAid for the last 5 years, doing trainings in different parts of the world. This is the fourth continent I'm doing trainings on. Before this, I was in West Africa working on youth activism and food rights, somehow related to land grabbing as well. And before that, doing trainings in Denmark, especially around biofuels and about youth empowerment. And before that, in the Middle East, doing trainings as well. What about you guys?
Alright, my name is Kaisa. Sorry, it's like allergies. I'm really not sure, but I basically was born and raised in this area, and I don't have like such an exciting CV as Sophie, but I recently finished my master's in public policy with a concentration in economics and international relations. I've been with ActionAid since September, and a lot of the work I do kind of revolves around youth engagement as well as Haiti diaspora community outreach and engagement. And before ActionAid, I have done some interesting internships, one with administrative training in Rwanda, and also the Daniel Pearl Foundation in Los Angeles. And I guess my interest after I finish my time with ActionAid would be to pursue a career in training and focusing on diaspora communities and different issues, especially international development, social and economic issues.
I'm a bit curious about like you guys. Why are you here?
Well, my name is Brett Rodenheis. I'm actually a junior at Brigham Young University in Utah, and I am studying economics and I'm interning with the Institute of International Education in DC. My supervisor sent me an email in regards to this roundabout event, and I currently work on a grassroots development program or fellowship program that focuses on development efforts throughout Latin America and the Caribbean.
And what do you want to get out of today?
What do I want to do after that?
No, what do you want to get out of this?
Oh,
just so I know right now too.
I guess most importantly, I want to know what types of educational efforts are being made to help solve these types of social problems, I guess you could say, throughout Latin America and in particular in El Salvador. What types of training are done, and then I guess what the government's looking at doing to help this problem.
Cool. What about you?
I'm a doctoral student, graduating this semester, but I did my dissertation on education policy in El Salvador. And I actually had a number of friends in El Salvador who are working in the anti-mining movement. So this being about El Salvador and anti-mining got my attention.
We just basically doing introductions and figuring out what different people want to gain from today. I've outlined that we are going to be focusing quite a bit on the types of trainings that we're doing and the human rights-based approach. Basically, why we think it's important to do youth trainings and how it fits into our whole understanding of development. And then we're going to dig a bit into the case of mining in El Salvador because it's a case of the camping course that we're running this summer. An important disclaimer, I'm not an expert on Latin America, I don't even speak Spanish. That's how much of an expert I am. And Kaisa isn't either. The whole point of us running these courses is that we don't have the solution to what should be done. And they are courses where people come together and find out how they want to approach this from a camping standpoint. What about you? Who are you and why are you here?
Okay, I have questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
And I am, my name is YH, Pat is the last name, and I am just beginning a dissertation on El Salvador with looking at feminist gender education and just thinking about that in the context of the recent World Bank 2020 and El Salvador's take on it. And I expect you're Edwards?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I found your work and I'm just enough about what you said. I think, oh, this is the person I've been reading. This is great. And so I'm interested in what you're doing in El Salvador. It seems to me that it's new to you, or what did you said you're going to run a program in El Salvador, and I'm headed towards I'm going to El Salvador for I don't know how long, and so I'm very much interested in speaking to all of you.
Cool. And what about you?
Hi, I'm Winslow. I'm the program coordinator at the Latin American Studies Center, and I just help put events like this together because our director, Dr. Karen Rosenblatt, very dynamic, has a lot of great ideas, and is trying to find ways to integrate our academic community with Maryland, DC, Virginia communities at large, especially in terms of issues related to Latin America. So this is more or less her idea, and it's a good one, and I'm just trying to, put it together for her.
Okay, I also work at the Latin American Studies Center, but I study Guatemala, so I just think issues that happen in Central America are really tied together, and there's a lot of issues that are similar between the areas, so just kind of seeing what's happening in El Salvador, you can kind of relate it to Guatemala, so just kind of seeing the issues that correlate and are similar.
Cool. Let me maybe just give an introduction to ActionAid and explain to you why we do not know a lot about El Salvador. ActionAid is a big international organization working in 45 different countries, and mainly working through local partnerships with community-based organizations or directly with affected communities on the ground. And the US office, well, actually it's been around since '72, and the US office has been around for the last 10 years, mainly working on US policies that influence the work that we do in other countries. So in the US, we are working, like I was just saying to Winslow, we have a bunch of people here right now for all of the World Bank meetings, and there is a conference on land grabbing that's preceding the World Bank spring meetings, where we're bringing the voices of the communities that we're working with on the ground on what does it mean when land grabbing is happening, what does corporate land grabbing mean, what does it mean about how the World Bank is engaging and using their investment policies, but what does it mean for the affected communities? And that's a type of policy work that our office is doing. We work a bit differently because we're the only ones working with community mobilization in the US and like grassroots campaigning in the US. And the basic project that we do is starting up what we call a global platform where we run trainings in the US on youth activism around different issues. So we don't work specifically on mining as an issue or on different things related to climate change or mainly on gender empowerment. We work across different issues but work with different youth. We're doing activism around it and then on linking youth internationally. So what we concretely do is opening up international skills trainings for youth activists and then we're looking into how we can start running trainings in the US. Yeah. But that's like the background. I want to go through, it sounds pretty boring, but it's not. I want to go through a bit of the history of why we're working like we do. Because I think ActionAid has taken a bit of a route that many different development organizations have. Do any of you know about the human rights-based approach? Does it like ring a bell? Yeah? How you been working with it?
No, but I'm aware of it.
Okay. And you guys? Anything? Alright, cool. Well, basically, ActionAid started with like the traditional child sponsorship. We would be taking child sponsorships in different countries in the north, and then we would be like channeling it out in the global south. And that was like back in the 70s. And then we've gone through a process of basically realizing that this was maybe not the most appropriate way of creating development. So we've gone from very much of a basic needs approach, only for the child or the children who sponsor, and then going into like in the 80s of working with the whole community, but still like the basic needs. Okay, we'll come with a water pump. Okay, we'll come build a school. And then in the 90s, there was a move into like, okay, let's empower some of the communities. We worked a lot with the pedagogy of Freire, and of working with like, okay, how can you create empowerment in the community? How can you be building the community basically to be doing a lot of the development work themselves? And the approach that we took was a bit like, okay, just don't wait for the state. Like, just let's do it in the communities together because the state's being useless anyway. And then through the nature of our organization, because we are like an NGO with affiliates in 45 different countries, we basically have like national NGOs that come together and set the strategic direction of our whole organization. And there was a movement, especially from the global south, of this is great, but it's not really working. It's not working enough. Because what we have was just like leaving the government to just lean back and not do anything and not be fulfilling any of the rights that we think people on the ground have. So we went from like, okay, teaching hungry to catch their own fish, into saying, okay, we are not working enough with the structures of who should be providing the different components of development. That was basically it. So now we've moved from being like, okay, let's fulfill the basic needs, and into empowerment of the communities, and into being like, okay, we do need to pressure the state and pressure the different actors who influence people and who influence the structures much more. I'd like to take a bit of a round before I go in more into like how we're working with it now, of how you guys define development and of how you guys see it. Which is obviously putting people a bit on the spot. It doesn't need to be like, and I'm in a university, but it doesn't need to be like an academic dissertation. But I'm curious, like, what do you think development is? What does it mean to you? Or how have you?
I mean, I think there's different paradigms, right? So different people have different preferences for how to go about development, but I favor more of the grassroots empowerment approach. I like the idea of applying pressure to the state. Kind of the state isn't necessary, but the state needs to be motivated. Kind of like, how can we do that? So working at the grassroots level, but also kind of, I don't know, working with degrees that can or would like to work on certain issues, but can also, I like the idea of building movements and applying pressure. So.
What about you guys? Degree?
I think that one of the fundamental factors of development is helping to, in many cases, helping to break down cultural barriers that would prevent certain development efforts to go about. I think that's something that a lot of times gets overlooked, and sometimes we think that there are development efforts that are made that development efforts a lot of times end up being. And I think that's one thing that needs to be better studied and understood.
What does that mean, cultural barriers?
I just like that, if you've got somebody that comes from, if you have somebody that comes from a different country that's trying to help people in a different culture, let's say you've got people from the US going to El Salvador, and you're trying to help them understand, a better way to do something, because, because we coming from the US have better, ideas in science and technology and stuff like that. And then you've got people in El Salvador that have been doing things for, hundreds of years. And it's like, because they have that built-in stigma, I guess you could say, or that built-in, what they're used to, their customs, they're not going to change overnight because some people from some place they don't even know is telling them that this is a better way to do it when this is how they're how they've done it for generations. So like, how do we go about breaking that down?
So who gets to define what development is?
I don't know if I can say. I'm not sure.
I don't know, I can say,
Yeah.
but I can think what I think it should be.
Yeah.
I don't know, what about you guys? What do you think?
I agree with his idea of development. Like, there are issues of people from like Western nations or like the U.S. going into these areas and trying to impose their ways of being. And I think, like for the people in El Salvador in this case, they need to decide their own ways of development and how they want to develop their ways, as opposed to us going in there and implementing like, well, this is the way you should do it because it works for us, because we have different ways culturally of existing.
What do you think? You're going down to El Salvador in a second.
My sense of development is informed by history and little quips like, before the Europeans went to Africa, they had the land, and the Europeans had the Bible, and then after the Europeans went, they had the Bible, and somebody else had the land. And so basically, I think it's a great scam. And I think that I'm interested in class in my research. And so I think of Salvadorians as basically a great example of transnational working class people, with 1/5 to 1/6 of Salvadorians in the US doing manual labor, and their education levels, what was it, the 4th grade education, so you can write Maria or 4 if you work in a sweatshop or you're in the street selling tomatoes or something like that. And this is generations and centuries of this. And El Salvador is a really good example because of many reasons in terms of U.S. foreign policy, basically El Salvador for years, and now in Iraq they were using the Salvador option when Negroponte went there, and so there's a lot of things that El Salvador opens up, and so the current mining and grabbing, as you're talking about, is a new sort of chapter in this long history.
So, from like a development perspective, you say that it's
I think it's a new, it's a new formula to reap profit for corporations.
right. I think that a lot. I think that the basic notion of how we look at this is that development should be decided by the communities that are affected by it, and that there is a massive paradigm of saying, okay, this is how we do development, and that it has a lot to do with economic growth from the global north, and that we don't agree with that, and that we need to take it from the communities that are affected, and they have to decide what it is, how they want to see it, and that really feeds into the way that we look at this. So we need to stop thinking that, okay, if we give these 5 different services to a community, we're gonna have like the development train will start going, and that's how we talk about things. Instead, what we need to look at is poverty is not about feeding in like a few things that we, at least in the global north, think is right for different communities. Okay, you should have water pumps. Okay, you should have schools. You should have different things that are defined by us. Instead, it's about looking up and seeing kind of the bigger picture of how a lot of the structural global policies are influencing the government policies and are influencing poverty. In the case of El Salvador, how some of the free trade agreements are influencing the government policy and what the government in El Salvador can do about mining, and that is then influencing the poverty of people living in the affected communities in El Salvador. And I think we agree a lot with part of what you were saying. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Right.
Right. But that there needs to be demands from the affected communities, but there also needs to be alternatives and a formulation of alternative ways of doing things. And then we need to apply pressure on the different levels. And the pressure needs to come from here in order to be credible. It's not enough that we're sitting and having like 1,000, I mean, our office is down on K Street, having like 1,000 different lobby organizations that don't have any rooting in the affected communities and going into Congress and saying, oh, this is what we need. That's not the right way of going about it. And what we instead believe is that you need to work with the affected communities across the globe, and then you need to be connecting them. And that's part of the reason why we work in 45 different countries and why we are, like I was saying, we're having a guy from Gambia now, there's a bunch of Guatemalans, of Cambodians who all speaking to the World Bank right now in the pre-spring meeting World Bank land grabbing conference. Because you need to link the people who are working, like land grabbing is a problem that we're seeing across the world, but it's related to some of the same root causes. And it's related to some of the US policies, and we need to be linking those different struggles across the world. So we can get this, so we can get movements. So we can get movements that are crossing borders, and so we can get movements that are pressuring not only locally and nationally, but also internationally. Like, pressuring the World Bank is pretty important for pressuring some of the reasons why we see land grabbing.
Transnational civil society?
Huh?
Building transnational civil society, I think is
Crucial.
important.
Yeah, and that's part of what we are trying to do, and that's also where we see links for activists who are working on the same issues, and not only the heads of organizations and movements, but facilitating more links between people who are part of those movements, and also realizing, I was working on land grabbing in Senegal and speaking to some of the El Salvadorians. I'm like, you guys are working on very different issues, very different cases, but it's all related to similar root causes. And if the activists that I was working with in Senegal would be able to talk to you guys, you would be learning so much from each other and forming those bonds. And that's part of what our project is going on now. And we basically we believe a lot in solidarity. I'm going to talk more about that, and especially talking to you now in the US. There is land grabbing going on in the US, but still, it's about standing in solidarity with people fighting for their own rights. And that's what we need as a basis of movements. And we need to be able to hold the powerful accountable. I mean, I think that's pretty clear by now. And we're not very neutral. I mean, we have a pretty, an understanding of who we should be holding accountable, both in terms of international governance structures, but also in terms of corporations that are setting part of the agenda in a lot of developing countries, but holding the different people who have the power accountable to the effects that they're causing on the ground. And then again, finding alternatives, I think that's a really powerful, it sounds like now we're just sitting here and screaming, oh, we should be holding the powerful accountable. It's also about finding alternatives to what's going on now and having those come from the ground. This is one of the guys I was working with in Gambia, where they had a drought and a hunger that hit half the country. And a bunch of youth were going out to work with women farmers and finding alternatives for how can we produce more food, but how can we do it in a sustainable way. So instead of just saying, oh, you should give us more money, it's not going well enough, then say, okay, we should do things in a different way. We should be using multi-cropping, we should be using other ways of doing things. Like I said, I'm not even pretending to be neutral, not at all. We're all about organizing, we're all about local organizing and linking it globally. This is a sum up. Basically moving into rights, but like who said people wanted to eat fish just because development experts decided that we like fish, and instead moving into like maybe people wanted to like retake the whole sea because it belonged to them. That's the kind of approach that we're coming from. I really like this picture of like don't teach people to fish, but instead teach them how to reclaim the sea.
Teach what?
Teach them how to reclaim the sea. It's basically going through this one of like, okay, back in the 70s, give the hungry fish to eat that. And then like, okay, that was empowerment. And that's what you still hear a lot in development lingo. A lot of like the, oh, as long as you empower people, you're great. No, there's still a missing link. So, to summarize a bit, like, this is our theory of change. This is how we believe that we can change some of not only the local issues, but also some of the systemic and structural causes. And there's a lot of empowerment for mobilizing communities still going on, but there's also a lot of linking that to global campaigns and being able to lobby both nationally and globally. And what we really focus on, and the reason why we are here talking about some of our trainings in El Salvador and other places, is about standing in solidarity with those people and about a lot of the policies that influence these local issues are emerging from here, and they're emerging from DC, both from the World Bank, but also from US government, and also from some of the firms and corporations that we have. So the way that we go about now, I've talked about like a super big picture, let's change the world in this way. That's all great. But like concretely, some of the ways that we go about working with it. I want to show you a video of what our trainings work on and how they work.
Same thing. Like it has changed my view on how you do things.
Same thing.
Like it has changed my view on how you do things because we've done so much in such a short time, and I've been challenged in so many different forms.
We've established this education with the aim of creating social change. By participating in the course in global change, you as a participant get the inspiration, the tools, and the experiences of carrying out large-scale projects and campaigns.
The fact that we were learning to do, I was doing that is like the best way of learning. That's fantastic. I thought change was.
The method and approach in this course is participatory learning. This means that you become a co-creator of the education that you're involved in.
One of the interesting things I learned from global change is how you can use the media to pass the message to reach a wider audience.
In the course, we do a lot to link theory with action. That means that if we're learning, for example, about events and doing events, we'll have it in the classroom, and then we'll take it out onto the streets and actually do it.
And that moment, like feeling we have 15, it's just around the corner. We have the campaign ready. We have all these volunteers that showed up and we have the campaign. And then we have the essence of campus, like very great.
Basically, the course culminates with a campaign, where we put together all the things that we've learned during the training and the field work and research. It's all put together and comes together in a campaign where people implement their ideas and they get a real first-hand experience with leading volunteers.
I can actually be part of doing something big, which I think is the major value for
Okay, this was a training that was taking place, I think if you, like, in any way is involved in climate change one, you'll remember COP15, because that was where it all broke down. It was in Denmark in 2009, 10, something like that. And that was the first time that we ran a camping course. So basically, we had a bunch of youth from different sub-Saharan African countries whose communities were affected by climate change, being together with a group of European, going through like a 2.5-month, how do you organize globally and how do you run a campaign on this? And then they ran a campaign around COP15 about changing the whole framing of how we look at climate, to not talk about, oh, climate change, but talk about climate debt and climate justice, climate equity, but basically about rich countries having a debt to poor countries for messing up with the climate and influencing all these communities where the African representatives were from. And they had these, all these red suits, and they just managed to be absolutely everywhere. The pictures of politicians there is the climate commissioner for the European Union, that they managed to like give a suit and get her to accept the whole concept of climate debt. They were working with the Yes Men, who are up in New York, on doing a fake stunt where they got the Canadian, they basically issued a fake press release for the Canadian government, apologizing for all of the havoc that they created, and like got a whole, they really managed to change part of this frame around climate change. The reason why I'm showing it to you is that this is how we're bringing people together. That you either, this was happening in Denmark because there was a political hook, and it was a really powerful message, not just to have a bunch of Europeans campaigning, but to have people who are affected by it and who can speak up around it. But also to be learning about, okay, how do you organize? How do you mobilize? How do you run these types of campaigns? And it's the same thing that we're doing in El Salvador this summer. There is less of a political hook. Like, I can't say that we have a COP15 in El Salvador, unfortunately. That's related to mining. But it's the same thinking behind it. So basically, it's all about political empowerment, and it's all about participating, learning about the theories behind it, but going out and doing it. And basically, we have these 8 platforms around the world where youth are coming together from both from the global south and from the global north to learn about what are the techniques for doing this sort of work. How do we do it? How do we, like, debating, okay, all of these are great ideas. We want to hear from the community what they think. We want to influence international decisions. But how do we do it? And that's what these courses are all about. So they're a little bit of like a lab for rethinking how we do grassroots organizing, both in the north and in the south. Yeah. I think you've heard me say these 3 words over and over again. They're basically the pillars of I mean, we think about it, but that you need to have the campaigns happening both locally and globally in order to be able to change it. Right, should we go into the case in El Salvador? Yeah. This is a case that we're going to be working on the training this summer. It's going to be with a bunch of El Salvadorians, people from Guatemala, then people from Honduras, yeah. Then we'll have people hopefully from Haiti and Brazil, because there's so much land grabbing happening there as well. So, I mean, get it right. It's a course. It's about learning methods for engaging in this, but we're trying to bring people together who have a motivation for working with land grab planning, and who find that working on this case and running events on it in El Salvador is going to be useful for them when they come home. Let's dig into that.
La situación de la minería aquí empieza ahí por el 2004. Creo que era algo que en ese año o en ese momento desconocíamos todos y todas qué era la minería. Algo para este departamento
De acuerdo a algunos expertos en medicina, algunos residentes del Valle de Siria parecieran exhibir síntomas de envenenamiento por metales pesados, lo cual puede ser causado por la ingesta de agua con altos niveles de metales pesados por un periodo largo. Deformaciones de la piel son síntomas comunes de envenenamiento por metales pesados y efectos a largo plazo pueden incluir cáncer, enfermedades del hígado, daño a los riñones, desórdenes del sistema nervioso y gangrena.
En resumidas cuentas, vivimos por cada kilómetro cuadrado 300 habitantes. La mayoría de la población no tiene acceso al agua potable. Donde se van a implementar los proyectos mineros es justo donde está todo lo que es la recarga acuífera de nuestro único, diría yo, río más grande de El Salvador, que es el río Lempa. La minería genera empleo, sí genera empleo, pero en comparación de la contaminación que deja, pues son miserables los empleos que dan a la contaminación, a la destrucción ambiental y social que deja estos proyectos mineros.
Se dio cuenta el personal de Radio Victoria a través de capacitación del impacto que va a traer a la población a Victoria, a través del cianuro y todo el arsénico y todo lo que salía de la minería. Radio Victoria se da cuenta de eso y comienza a pautar cuñas promocionales, entrevistas y espacios donde la gente comenzara a enterarse en qué en realidad encierra la minería. En el 2007, la empresa minera canadiense Pacific Rim llega a la radio y le dice a nuestro compañero: nosotros les pagamos $8,000 mensuales para que ustedes dejen de estar diciendo lo que están diciendo de la minería y de nosotros. Tiene una posición clara en decir que no nos deben agotarle a ustedes como empresa. Nosotros defendemos nuestro medio ambiente y defendemos la vida de la población que trabaja. De los 23 de julio, ya a través de todo el trabajo que he realizado, ya informé la nómina a la casa, mi casa personal, donde la empresa, que yo soy el siguiente de la misma, entonces iba a desatar todo lo que fueron una secuencia de amenazas que empezaron a caer correos electrónicos a todo el personal de la radio, sabotaje a la antena de transmisión de la radio.
José Alexander Beltrán Castillo, Ludwig Franklin Iraeta y Vladimir Arcayala, quienes laboran en la radio Victoria, han sido víctimas y están siendo víctimas de amenazas a su integridad, a su vida, a su integridad personal.
They're very simple stories that repeat themselves. So this could be just a problem. It's a problem of global community. It's not a question of that out. This is how things work.
Fue un clima de
está ahí el juicio, está en secreto, no sabemos qué pasa. Urge la presión internacional a este tribunal, de dónde hacerla para que salga una resolución favorable al país.
So we hear about a sad or complicated story and it might pull on our heartstrings, but we don't see any of the connections. And often we're directly involved in these issues. These are our companies, these are our shareholders, these are our boards of directors, these are our investors, and all the benefits flow forward, even as all the harms occur there.
Okay. Can you take over, Gunther? All right. This is the case that our platform in El Salvador is working on. Basically, they're running campaign trainings continuously. Right now, there's a 2.5-month campaign training with youth only youth from the region, and they are working specifically on a water campaign and on how the mining issues are contaminating the water. So they're doing a bunch of actions around that. In the previous campaign course, they were doing a lot about how the communities are being heard in this, around some of the dam issues that are still related but not specifically on this, and where they were basically staging like campaign events in front of the Ministry of Environment. Because setting up a dam in El Salvador would result in like a community of 2,000 people being flooded, and the community hadn't even been consulted on it. So they staged like a creative demonstration in front of the Ministry of Environment and got like 3 of the national TV crews to come and cover it, and then the minister actually took community members and part of the youth campaign and group in to be like, okay, maybe it's a problem that we didn't listen to you. So those are like some of the things that are going on. We don't really have much more. We can talk about the specific case, but as we said, this is not something that we are experts on. We can tell you what our people are doing on the ground, and there's some campaigning efforts happening here, but I think there's a chance that you guys know much about it than we do.
Does ActionAid partner with anybody in El Salvador?
We don't have a country office in El Salvador. Our country office is in Guatemala. We do partner with the people who make the movie, so with CISPES and with Rights Action. Do you know more about your specific partners on the campaign?
I think it's one group but like we different there's several grassroots organizations that are on the ground that we partner with to work.
So Addis was one of them, which is in Cabañas, which is the main woman that was in your and so I assume that's what you're talking about, is that correct?
I can
But basically, the way that they do it when they run the different campaign cases is that they go out to one of the communities where the property is most present and live with them for an extended period of time to be like figuring out, so what's the issue in the community and how we will run a campaign around that. So it depends.
So you have done that already in El Salvador?
Yeah, that's what they like. The campaign course that they're running right now is on clean water. They did that. I don't know which community they were in because I don't know El Salvador. But they do that for that's part of the process of establishing a campaign that's within this framework, is that you go and live with the community to identify what are the issues, what's already going on with efforts on the ground. So they work with different partner organizations, and depending on the different campaigns that they're taking on for that course, they go and live with different communities. And that was why, like I said, with the dam, they found out that from living in the community, they found out that the biggest issue was that, according to El Salvadorian law, they were supposed to be consulted on there being established a dam that would like flood the whole space, but they hadn't. And that was what they found out by living, and then they staged all these demonstrations looking into it. And applied pressure on it.
So can you say more about the summer project that's going to be in El Salvador? And is there plans also in the future, the second question about bringing like people from El Salvador here to, so what's both of those things? What's happening this summer?
Basically, these are all of the platforms that we currently have where we run courses. These are the 4 courses that we've opened up for Americans this summer. The main point of me being here is to establish a platform in the US where we run trainings based on like the types of lobbying that we do in the US, and on running similar campaign trainings, but in the US where you have actors from the global south coming up here and working on the campaigns. So that's in the pipeline. But it's also, I mean, this needs to be a two-way thing. We basically want to establish the ability both of Americans, Europeans, people from other countries to go and work with the communities on the ground and doing campaigns there, and then having it go the other way. But it being so much more than just like, oh, I'll go and see what the situation is on the ground, but being action focused and being focused on learning how to run these types of campaigns. So hopefully we'll have US on the map in like a few months' time. But, well, my point was mainly just, as I said in the beginning, we're not issue specific. The point of having these trainings is on the like thinking behind it, and on moving many different issues. Like a lot of the people that we work with in Nepal and in Myanmar are working a lot on violence against women, and that's like their main campaign and their main issue that they're focusing on. So then that's like the theme that's going through there, and that's also on some of the Nepalese courses. What else? What do you? I mean, I'm a bit curious. I've been talking for ages. What do you guys think?
What does ActionAid do when people need legal support?
Depends on the case. I know that you mean legal support as to there's been.
Well, I mean, people can get into trouble doing what you want them to do. So.
It depends on the partners that we're working with on the ground. Because we never do this sort of work on our own, but do it in partnership with local organizations. It depends on that. I think it's also important to underline that we work a lot with risk assessments of how you're working on these issues. And basically, I mean, a big part of the campaign planning is that you map out with a power analysis of who do you need to pressure where, and how do you go about it in a way where you don't necessarily get yourself arrested. I know that in the US there's a great tradition of getting yourself arrested and of using that to create focus, but we really don't want that to happen for our participants in El Salvador or in the Middle East or in Gambia or anywhere else. So the legal support goes through the local partners that are working on it, and the risk assessment is like also a huge part of it. We do work quite a lot with creative means of putting pressure on it. So like the demonstration that they staged in front of the Ministry of Environment, the fact that we mainly work with youth can be quite a powerful card in basically being able to negotiate the lines a little bit of how far you can go. And it's kind of youth are very rarely taken serious. But you can also spin that and use it as a way to be able to pressure just a bit more than what you would otherwise be able to do. And use like a lot of fun events and creative events to still apply pressure, but do it in a way where you're not being taken in.
And to answer your question you asked before, we work with Nestle Nacional. Right for and it's, our global platform is in Suchitoto.
Okay.
Thank you.